Hello everyone, and welcome to Chemical Engineering Thermodynamics. We got lecture 1 here where what we're going to do is we're going to embark on thermodynamics, and in today's video what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is thermodynamics, why do we care about thermodynamics, and we're going to review a lot of energy terms that you've probably seen in previous classes such as chemistry, physics, and material and energy balances if you've taken it. And those forms of energy we'll talk about are kinetic, potential, internal energy, as well as heat and work. So to get started, what is thermodynamics? And in a nutshell, thermodynamics is the study of energy. That's it. We're trying to understand how we shift from one energy to another form of energy. And in some cases, what we're doing is we're taking some potential energy and transferring it into work or heat. And there's been a huge study on thermodynamics for centuries because of how important it is, especially in today's society. Now, in addition to just studying energy, we also want to think about, on the chemical side, chemical thermodynamics, which is where we're studying the interrelation of energy with chemical reactions or with a physical change of state. This is also really important, especially if you're a chemical engineer, because we're going to deal with a lot of chemicals. We want to think about the energy that is within our chemical system, and then also what are the energy requirements necessary in order to perhaps separate out my chemicals so that I can get something pure. Now, the other part of this is, we now know what thermodynamics is, but we also want to know, why do we care about thermodynamics? And it, again, ties together with energy. So we can apply thermodynamics in a lot of different parts of our everyday life, such as with airplanes. We have the turbines that are part of the airplane, and that's taking a lot of fuel and then converting that fuel into energy and thrust so that it is able to allow the airplane to go up in the air. You also, on a similar note, you have wind turbines, which are collecting wind energy and converting it into electricity that's sent to the power grid. And in the same vein, you also have your steam turbines. So if you're at a power plant, what you're going to do is you're going to use some fuel, like natural gas, you're going to combust it, you're going to generate steam, and then from the steam, what you'll do is you're going to spin a collection of turbines that are connected to a set of magnets that will then eventually generate AC current, which is, again, how we're generating electricity. So there's a lot of different energy that we're using and harnessing for everyday operations. And in addition to all these different forms of energy we talked about, there's also, on the chemical side, we're going to be thinking about chemical separations. So for example, we have distillation. You can also think about extraction, absorption, and a collection of other separations. And what are the energy requirements necessary to get a pure compound or close to a pure compound? So there's a lot of reasons why we want to know and understand thermodynamics and characterize the real world using equations to help us identify what's physically possible and impossible. So hopefully, now that we have a grasp and an understanding of why thermodynamics is so important, what we'll do now is let's jump into our energy terms and let's just review those. So our first energy term we've got is kinetic energy. And as you've seen in physics, our kinetic energy is calculated with 1/2 mv squared, where your m is our mass, your v is velocity, and our ek is kinetic energy. Now, as we talk about kinetic energy, there's also some important unit conversions that I want to cover with you that will benefit you and are ones that I recommend you start memorizing. So the first one we have is that 1 kilogram times meter per second squared is 1 Newton, right? And that's something that works out really nicely when you're using the metric system, is that if you take your mass in kilograms, multiply by meters per second squared, it naturally just converts to a Newton. But it's something handy to remember. We also have that 1 Newton times a meter is a joule. Again, nice conversion, just really handy to remember those units convert into joules. And then the final one we have is that 1 kilogram times meter squared per second squared is equal to 1 joule. And essentially that's just, if you took your Newton, broke it down into its components, and multiply by a meter, you get the same thing, it's a joule. So these are all really important unit conversions that I would recommend you memorize, because it's important to be fluent in some of the simpler unit conversions, especially when you're talking to other people and or doing your own calculations to minimize any mistakes you make. So on that note, what we'll do is let's jump into potential energy now. So with our potential energy, we've got our potential energy is equal to mass times gravity times height, where we've got gravity as 9.807 meters per second squared, or if you're using the English system, you've got 32.174 feet per second squared. Now, there's a couple of additional useful unit conversions. You may not have to memorize these ones, but they'll be handy to also recognize. And these are all English unit conversions. So in this case, we have that a pound mass times foot per second squared. That is a force. And it's not exactly a pound force. You actually have to convert from pound mass times foot per second squared to get a pound force. And the unit conversion here is 32.174 pound mass times foot per second squared is going to give you 1 pound force. And then if you want to go from a force to a energy, so we take that force multiplied by distance, in the English system, what that would be is you'd have 1 foot times pound force, and that equals 1.356 joules. And so that's our potential energy. Our next form of energy that we have is internal energy. And internal energy is a little bit of a weird energy to think about because it's all the energy stored within matter on a microscopic level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a very crude diagram just to kind of illustrate some of these different pieces of energy that go into internal energy. So let's assume that box is my system, and inside my system, I've got this one molecule, right? You've got these two atoms that are bonded together, and there's a collection of different forms of energy on the microscopic level. So you've got this vibrational energy within the bond. You have the existence of the bond within your molecule. You've got rotational energy of your molecules. And then you've also got this translational energy, so your molecules moving around. And all of these different pieces contribute to the internal energy of your system. And the challenge is that it's really hard to measure, actually it's impossible to measure your internal energy on an absolute scale. And that can be problematic, but there are some ways that we can circumvent that issue. We'll talk about one on the next slide. But one thing that is really helpful in characterizing the internal energy of a system is temperature. So temperature is the major metric that we can use to measure how much energy we have in a system and to benchmark the internal energy of our system. Now, as I mentioned, we don't have an absolute scale for internal energy, but what we can do is we can pick a reference state and think about things with respect to that reference state, where we say the reference state is 0, and then everything has a change in energy with respect to that reference state. Now, in particular, if we think about steam, which is often a big component of our energy process because we generate steam to spin turbines, we have steam tables, which is a collection of a lot of data with respect to steam at a variety of conditions. So what I have here is one example where I've got a pressure of 1 bar, and then I've got a collection of temperatures at 1 bar. And as you look at the top, you've got your temperature, and then we've got a specific volume, we've got specific internal energy, specific enthalpy, and specific entropy. And what I want to point out as we look at this steam table is the internal energy. Now, I mentioned before, we can use this to quantify internal energy, but you may notice something interesting on our internal energy. The variable is U, but our U has a caret on top. Now, what the caret on top is indicating is that this is an energy per mass. So in this case, it's kilojoules per kilogram, right? And the reason why that's important is because we need to speak on the basis of energy per mass or energy per something, because if you have different masses or quantities of your material, you're going to have different amounts of internal energy. So by putting on a per mass basis, that normalizes the amount of energy on a per mass basis. Now, we can also speak about internal energy on a per mole basis. And if we do, what we're going to do is we're going to change our U to look a little different. Now, in that case, we'll have a U with an underbar. And that U with the underbar is going to indicate that we have kilojoules per mole. Similarly with enthalpy, entropy, and specific molar volume, those are also going to be on the same case where if it's a caret, that's indicating it's on a per mass basis, and if it's with an underbar, that's indicating it's on a per mole basis. Now, looking at the steam table, if we were to find the internal energy at, let's say, a temperature of 200, what you'll see is that that internal energy is 2,658.2 kilojoules per kilogram. Now, on the steam table, you'll have to find what state is the reference state, and the way you can tell is you'll look for the temperature, pressure, and phase where your U hat is equal to 0. That is our reference state. All right. So now that we've talked about kinetic, potential, and internal energy, our next form of energy we'll talk about is work. And work is energy used to impart motion. So we can write work as the change in work is equal to the force times the change in length. And we can integrate that so that we get work is equal to a force times a length. So we can think about one example where we have a block with a certain mass of m. We can pretend that there's a shelf that we're going to move my block from and to. So the block is currently, let's say, on the floor, and we want to move it to the shelf. And we want to think about the amount of work that requires. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify the height that we had to move the block up, and we're going to take into account the amount of force that is applied to my mass. Now, in that case, that means the weight. So we're going to do F equals ma. And since this is speaking in terms of weight, that A actually is going to become gravity. So from here, what we'll do is we'll have our work equals our force times length. We can substitute in my force being mass times gravity. And that gives me my work is equal to mass times gravity times length, or height. Right? And you might recognize that that looks just like potential energy, which it is. We can see that our work is going to equal the potential energy. We're going to put a certain amount of work in, leaving us with a certain amount of potential energy. Now, in addition to this form of work, we may also get some work happening when you have, let's say, a piston that expands or contracts. So starting with our work is equal to, or dW is equal to F times dL. So the change in work is equal to the force times the change in length. We're going to now look at a system where we have a piston, right? We've got an external pressure applied to the piston to keep it at a particular height. You have a pressure from the gas that's inside the piston, and something is happening within our system so that you have an expansion. Your gas is expanding and taking up more volume and applying some force against your atmospheric pressure. And so what we want to do here is calculate our work due to expansion. So this is where we're going to need to modify my work term a little bit. So from here, what we'll do is we'll look at how we can convert our force into pressure. So pressure is equal to force per area. And from here, we can rearrange it so that force is equal to pressure times area. We can now substitute that into my work equation. So dW is equal to PA times dL. And the next thing what I want to do is we're going to change that area times length. We're going to change that into volume. And so we're going to make that dV equals negative AdL. The reason why we're making it a negative is because as we're changing the volume, right, we're having that expansion going on, that negative sign is indicating to us that we are releasing some work, so work is being done onto the system and is leaving our system. And that's something you want to be very careful with as you're working with your energy terms, is you want to think about, is the plus and minus sign indicating, or rather, am I getting work done on my system or is work being done by my system? So we can think about that as, is work coming into my system or being released out of my system? In this case, because we're having that expansion, that's indicating that we're releasing work into my system or releasing work from my system. So from here, we're going to have we'll substitute in. We got dW equals negative P dV. And from here, what we can do is we can do an integration, and we can say that our work due to expansion or compression is equal to negative P dV. All right. And so that covers our work. And the next form of energy that we have is heat. And heat is the energy that's transferred between the system and the surroundings. So sometimes you may have heat going into the system, or it may be released from the system. If you have heat going into the system, we're going to identify that that's a positive sign. So heat's going into the system, we are gaining energy. And if you are releasing heat from the system into the surroundings, that's going to have a sign of a negative because it's indicating we're releasing, it's leaving our system. Now, as I was talking about with work, this is the same sign convention for work. So anything that's going into my system, that's considered work. We are gaining it, so there's a plus sign for the work. And any energy that's leaving my system is negative work. Now, there's a couple of other terms that we want to be aware of for when we deal with heat. So the first one is that when you have an adiabatic system, that means that no heat is entering or leaving the system. If that's the case, that means that you're adiabatic, your Q is going to equal 0 because there's no heat entering or leaving. The other trick that you may catch when you're getting a system described to you is that you may hear that the temperature of the system is equal to the temperature of the surrounding. If that's the case, that also means that you have no heat transfer in the system because there's no temperature gradient. And so now that we've covered all these different forms of energy, the other part that I want to talk about is your system. There's two different ways we can describe our system. So we can have either a closed system, which is where you got a closed system. That means that there's no matter entering or exiting my system. Only energy can enter and exit. So that means I can have heat and work going into my system. I can have heat and work leaving my system, but that's it. There is no matter that is going into and out of my system. Conversely, if you do have matter as well as energy going into and out of the system, you now have something called an open system. In an open system, you have your energy that can go in and out, but now you, in addition, have mass that can go in and out of your system. And what you may also notice that I've done is I've changed the Q and W terms a little bit, and I put a dot on top of them. That dot is indicating that that's an energy per time. And so if you're using the metric system, that means that you're going to have joules per second. All right. So really good to just memorize that and just remember, if you have an open system, you have mass crossing the bounds. If you have a closed system, there is no mass crossing your bounds. And with that, that wraps up our first lecture. And I just want to recap with you that we've got for kinetic energy that it's 1/2 mv squared. We've got for potential energy, it's mass times gravity times height. You've got for work, it's equal to force times length. But if you have expansion or compression, that's going to equal the negative integral of P dV. We've talked about that for internal energy. It's the energy stored within matter on a microscopic level. And we also mentioned that you can write your internal energy as with a hat above it, indicating it's a specific internal energy on a per mass basis. You can also have specific internal energy on a per mole basis, and that's with a U underbar. In terms of our sign convention, when it comes to heat and work, we talked about that a positive sign is indicating we have heat and work going into the system, and if we have a negative sign, that means it's leaving our system. And finally, we talked about that if you have a closed system, you can only have energy traveling into and out of the system. And if you have an open system, that means that we now have mass also that's crossing the bounds going into and out of the system. And with that, that's going to wrap up this first lecture. And stay tuned for the next one.